We all go a little mad sometimes.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
They're here. So, come up to the lab and see what's on the slab. I see you shiver with anticipation.
Hello. You've arrived on a very special occasion. So, happy Pride Month, everybody. You're listening to The SLAB, our monthly show, last Friday of every month. And this week, we are concluding our Pride Month with Camp Notes on Horror.
How very special. How very camp. Tell us, Lee.
Adrian, it's been a positively camp experience here today.
Positively camp. And what is camp? Can you define it for me? Can you have a definition of camp for me?
Okay, the one with the book. Go ahead. Someone's read the notes. Okay. Okay.
Someone has some notes, some quotes, some special...
Someone has an insight in Condé Nast. Okay.
Yes, of course. Our title is obviously a reference to Susan Sontag's 1964 essay Notes on Camp. In a way, it outlines the characteristics of camp, which is, you know, how do I describe it? Irony, humor, parody, excess, extravagance, theatricalization. It's extravagant in many ways, and, you know, in a way, we should say this at the beginning, that to define camp, she describes it as, is therefore to betray it. So we've always said this, and we've said it over the last few weeks, that we don't see the word camp as something, as a negative. We see it rather as a positive. We see it as a benefit to whatever we describe camp being, because it describes something that is above and beyond and far too much, and performativity,
like,
everything.
I wouldn't be able to draw camp for you, but I know camp when I see it. Do you know what I mean?
Camp is a woman dressed up in 10 million pink flamenco feathers. Like, you know, pink flamingo. See what I did there?
Yeah. And like, I grew up kind of being described as camp, like, a lot, you know, because I was very kind of theatrical and expressive and dramatic, all that kind of stuff, you know. But yeah, camp is not a bad word.
No,
over
it's
here
not.
They're here. Over here at the SLAB.
Huh?
Over here at the SLAB.
On the SLAB, we probe, we postulate, and we dignify a topic of usually everyone's selection. However, this week, being that it is Pride Month, we did want to have a discussion based off of queer representation in specifically horror, because of course we are a horror podcast. So we're gonna give it to you. And before we start, I want to make this very
all the way up to the shoulder, baby. Yeah. Tower of power, grease to the elbow.
Before we really kind of do get into the meat, and we want to grind up on this like greasy, you know, stud muffin of a topic, I do want to say that this is something that I was speaking to you about, and it was a genuine concern of mine as I was being hesitant to talk about a topic that I'm purely...
No, being gay is not contagious.
No, what I want to say is that when it comes to me being obviously straight, heterosexual, the normativity lines of, you know, the mainstream, shall we say, the identity politics can get wrapped up in quite a lot of things. So, for example, what I would like to state very clearly from the moment is I, as not being a person...
You faggots! All of you!
Myself as not being part of the queer community, I am purely noting everything that I talk about during this episode will be from an outsider's perspective looking in. And what I have to say is purely based in fact. And it's not drawing parallels to insult or create a notion where there's a separation between enjoying horror for what it is versus seeing horror for what it could actually be. And I know that, like, what we're going to start talking about, because we do want to talk about very, as kind of like the first part of this is queer coding itself. And we want to kind of start, not necessarily chronologically, but we do want to start from a place where we can very easily draw out.
Apparently, chronologically is a bad word on this podcast. And now I just want to quickly say before we jump in, also as a heterosexual man, I don't want anybody thinking that I'm coming at this from a judgmental point of view. Me and the wife are very supportive of you gays. I just think you're fantastic. You know, with your dance moves and your music, I think these are fabulous.
We go to church every Sunday and we pray for you.
Oh God. Me and the wife being a cardboard cutout of Drew Barrymore over here. No, but seriously, gay as Christmas over here. I actually say that a lot, that I was camper than a row of tents. I don't know why I always loved that though. Like I much prefer to be referred to as camp than like gay or whatever like that. It just felt so much more like comfortable and kind of like less like, because to me when I was a kid, like as a kid, what like I'd rather be like a freak than a gay, which is so stupid because like I am both and was very obviously both. But yeah, sorry, quick interjection there.
Yeah. No, I think it is very good to kind of specifically self-identify before we do kind of get into the, you know, the good kind of fucking rubbing of the scalp here. So we're definitely, it's good to kind of draw the line and show who we are, what we identify as, and to get the point across, to get the message across, and that's exactly what this episode is going to be. So I do want to open it up with, like I just said, there is the topic of queer coding, and I do want to start from somewhere where it is fairly evident, and I only recently discovered these facts, and I was so astonished. And like, even though I am not part of the queer community, the LGBTQIA+,
you're an ally. That's your drag name, an ally. Yeah.
That I was very proud to find this out, because essentially the gay community itself up and saved Universal, Paramount, the beginnings of Disney, and everything. So like I really gotta give props where props are due, and like, you know, God bless those old dead faggots, because they did so well.
Thank you, sister, with a C. No, for real, it's like there's so much that can be read into when it comes to queer coding. And again, like I think like we both kind of wanted to come across with the when we just wanted to make this episode not just specifically about like gays in Hollywood or gays in horror, you know what I mean? It's like there's huge representation, good and bad, for everybody kind of within the alphabet mafia, as we've now come to be known. But seriously, I think we can just mention very quickly is that like gay and queer characters have been in mythology since the jump. Like
since the dawn of time,
literally, we've always been around, with varying degrees of fear and understanding and hatred and
acceptance,
like being embraced,
everything,
like, exactly. Like there was once a time where being queer, and like when I say queer, I am using that as a synonym for anybody that isn't straight or like cisgender. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Just like everybody in that. It's easier than saying LGBTQ plus IA upside down Batman symbol, whatever it is, you know, every time. And like I think going back to like ancient Greece, where homosexuality was seen as the most masculine thing that you could do because it's
dominating another man.
There's no femininity involved, exactly. And there is quite a number of like witches and things like that, women who are solitary, powerful women, in ancient mythology, kind of all across the world, you know. And
Lilith,
lesbianism and like witchcraft have kind of become synonymous with each other. The idea of a woman choosing not to be with a man, the idea of like that woman living by herself out in the forest, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
always kind of been around.
It's about that kind of not necessarily self-othering, although not identifying with the kind of mainstream accepted society at each of these times that we will kind of in turn talk about. But that's exactly what you're just saying there. It's the othering of what society norms have. So for example, like you just said there, the old woman that lives out in the woods on her own, like it is about that the othering of people who aren't necessarily accepting the norms but prefer to live on their own standards, their own existence on their own terms. And nowadays, specifically because like we're sort of I'm not going to say we have, because there is still that kind of stigma that does rely on certain tropes, but we are moving past that kind of, you know, sycophantic religious conservatism where anything that doesn't come across the norm is less acceptable. It's kind of pushed, you know, to the side, not spoken of, or anything like
Thanks,
that.
Christianity.
You know, so, but yeah, it's exactly what you're saying there. It is the othering of the others, you know, where everyone is sort of pushed, you know, we don't talk about that. It's kind of so it's
well, it's a huge factor as to why I think queer people, I'm not going to say like queer people like in particular, because like everybody can love horror, but I think there's kind of this innate love of horror and kind of monsters and things like that by the queer community, because we relate. There's again, like you're saying, it's like it's you can find relatability in the other, whether that other be the vampire that lives alone in the castle, whether it be a witch or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just like you relate to being on the outside, kind of not even by your own choice.
Yeah.
You know, being vilified for just something that you are, you know, being the monster.
Yeah. I think that is a very kind of interesting like way to kind of suggest that, because monolithically horror, queerness, all of that, it opposes conservatism and heteronormativity ideologies very well, and the monster is to normality as homosexuality is to heterosexuality. So, you know, i.e. the monster in the closet, all of that type of thing can be very easily explained and so understandable as to
like
why...
last week, the closet monster in the last
the closet monster. Yeah, so like it can be very easily explained away, and I suppose that is a kind of really good segue to talk about, you know, the grandparents of horror themselves. And we sort of did kind of very lightly touch on this when we talked about you know, the directors of Dracula and Frankenstein and all of that very lightly in our previous
James
episode,
Whale.
which was at James
Famous.
Exactly. God
famous
rest.
and proud gay pioneer, really, for
really
Hollywood.
Was. He really was. Plus, he was out and proud about it, even though he was shunned for his homosexuality. He was very out and proud about it, and you know, for the times, it's a very brave move.
I have to kind of like bow down, and like I really do look at these people as like my ancestors in a way, you know, because it's like these people really, really did pave the way for kind of all of us, straight or no, to be able to be ourselves. Todd Browning, the director of Dracula, famously caused a scene in the cafeteria when they were filming Freaks, because none of I'm pretty sure it was MGM. they didn't want, the main stars of whoever was filming at the time didn't want to share the commissary and the cafeteria with these quote unquote freaks, you know, and he famously kind of stood up and was like, no, they're working here the same as you. They're paid the same as you. Yeah. They're human beings, and they're here to take up just as much space as you do. You know, and that in itself, no, they may not have been queer, but they were the other. They were being shunned just for being just who they were. And yeah, I think people like that are very, very important. We have people like Quentin Crisp, you know, people who are like very, very openly queer back in the day, where you could have just been thrown in jail. You could have just been thrown in jail and never heard from again. Yeah. You know, and that would have been socially acceptable, you know?
Yeah. I do, I just kind of want to touch on this very quickly, that what you just said there about like whether paving the way and like whether being straight or gay, no matter gay, straight or bi, that with that whole thing, I think it's like, because we also talked about that with our first episode of the month, which is the Rocky Horror Picture Show, that like even you said is like, even if you weren't gay, you'd still be a super, super freak, and I'm the exact same. I don't think at least nowadays, I don't think sexuality should always define the person that you are, but it is a big part of obviously your life. But I think it's exactly what you did there. It paved the way for not necessarily just the queer community, but people who, like we said before, was going against the normativity of the era and like wanted to be, just to be able to have the freedom of self-expression and like stay the weirdo that you are. And I think, yeah, no, you definitely, you hit the nail on the head there with that for sure.
And I think, thank you. And I think these things, thank you. I think these things are very much so, like we were saying, it had to be right place, right time. You kind of had to catch lightning in a bottle, you know, for these things to work. And I think like there's huge amounts of like undertones in the last 100 years, and only kind of recently in the past maybe 20-30 years has subtext been able to be text. Yes. And have it not be the joke or the embarrassment or something that you have to be like ashamed of, you know what I mean, in movies. That's why like you get a huge jump in the 40 years, I think, between Frankenstein and Rocky Horror, which are the same story essentially, and almost kind of told in the same way with just an extra pair of fishnets on. You know what I mean? Like, no, but really, I think like Hollywood still being so new, like so new of a concept, or like RuPaul says that it's like Hollywood is not a place, it's an idea, you know? I think like movies are like a very, very perfect way to kind of see the like actual tangible progress of how the world thinks of people as a whole, the way people think of women, queer people, people of color, men, children, whatever. It's like we're very, very lucky that we're kind of able to pinpoint so exactly the progress of the world through these things, you know? And that's why I think like cinema is so important. Cinema is like, it really is important. And I think like, I know like you or I would not be the people that we are without cinema, you know? It's like I, as a child, like saw myself in so many characters and was able to kind of say like, oh shit, like, okay, I think I'm going to be that. Like that's possible to like be that, you know, whether it be a Frankenfurter or an Ursula or whatever, you know. It's like, it's very, very empowering to see yourself on screen, regardless of who or what you are. No matter what or who you are. But for real. Yeah.
I just want to very quickly talk about that whole kind of depression era with equating
to... Nathan, what was that like?
I was there. It was great. Loved it. Very, very black, very black and white.
Would have been a lot less depressing if they had television.
But I just have to, because I think these two quotes, i.e. both queer representation writers, Lugoski and Vito Russo, they both had books that the first one was The Celluloid Closet, which was essentially queer coding in between the 1920s and 40s. So what he said, he said specifically about Frankenstein, that the vision of both films, i.e. Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein, had of the monster was an antisocial figure in the same way that gay people were quote-unquote things that should not have happened. So what he very specifically was talking about was how the other, literally, it was the same with the Invisible Man, how the Invisible Man, how the other would slowly begin to detach themselves from society, and then as the detachment grew and grew and grew, it would cause a stir in the, you know, heteronormative society, and then eventually that society would seek to destroy the other or the abnormality, i.e. homosexuality at the time. So it is very, very, very obvious that when you get films like Dracula, who was very queer coded, I mean, well dressed, a literal predator of both men and women, where he attacked women but he charmed men to living alone, aristocratic,
and like vampires are famously queer coded, almost specifically Dracula. Dracula is never, it's kind of odd when you don't see Dracula take a bisexual turn in media. Dracula, written by famous closeted man Bram Stoker.
Exactly. But
wow. Great. Anyway,
the concept of quote unquote otherness can be theorized in many ways, functioning as something external to the culture, or one's own self, but also as what is repressed, though never destroyed, in the self. So fairly obvious now, and very thinly disguised, being Dr. Frankenstein, specifically, considering he has his wife murdered and they use her corpse to procreate with another male doctor a life. It is very thinly when you look back at it, it is very thinly disguised as is, and
it's see, this really kind of ties to something that I was saying to you right before recording, is the idea of conception without sex, conception without parents, kind of a thing. You know, it's the idea of like life without a man and a woman coming together, the idea of a man creating a man with kind of just himself, and then like the kind of the act of like defiance of God, like playing God, like being huge in Frankenstein, you know. And then we get like in The Bride of Frankenstein, I forget who it is, because I haven't seen The Bride of Frankenstein in like 10 years or something. Hugely disappointing, because she's only in it in the last 10 fucking minutes. And all she does is shriek and die. She's terrified at the sight of Frankenstein, which is great, because he's literally just like, oh, and she literally like, ah! She does a thing. They give her like the sound effect of a swan hissing. I love that. I think that's gorgeous. Yeah. But there's a character in that movie, I think it's like a mentor of Victor Frankenstein or something like that, who was hugely gay, so outrageously flamboyantly gay. Kenneth Williams style flamboyance. You know, it's coded, but only because they didn't explicitly say, "Get a load of this homo." You know, like he's very, 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 you know, limp-wristed.
Very limp.
And these characters are everywhere. There was kind of the idea of like the passive queer, the idea of it being like a feminine man, but never showing compassion or like love for another man. You know, it's like the non-threatening homosexual. You know,
Yeah.
The ones that try and like kind of not disguise themselves, but the ones that don't take on the idea of like, okay, we're gonna build our own culture. It's the idea of like, no, we want to acclimate and we want to be like normalized. And to me, like I guess that's fine. I'm not like judging you if you want to do that. But to me, again making it about me, it's a talent. I've always enjoyed being othered.
Yeah.
You know, but like that's just me. I get that it is kind of a strange feeling, or it's kind of, it might even sound weird to say that, but I like the idea of having
You are the weirdo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I try. But it's like I like the idea that like our friend group was quite small, but I liked the idea that it's like, well, we were all the little freaks and we got to just be freaks around each other. You know, I never found it appealing to want to appeal to everybody. You know, that just seems very like boring and kind of like blasé to me. You know, the idea of being in and being like everybody else, as I'm sure you agree, just seems so bland. Just seems so vanilla.
Yeah. No, you're very...
And that's why it is always really nice to see over the top, extravagant characters like a Dracula or a Victor Frankenstein, or even Claude Rains's Invisible Man. You know, it's like I love those kind of things. And I think that's why people kind of latch on to horror cinema, because we find those types of characters in there.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I definitely do agree with you there. I mean, like, with Dracula and the Invisible Man, I mean, fear and anxiety for the queer authoritarian figure at the time, who was well groomed, who was a predator, and things like that, was exactly that, you know? I mean, i.e., you just have to look at the film Dracula's Daughter, which was, I think, 2, maybe 3 sequels later after Dracula.
Yeah.
Hello, lesbians! Oh, how romantic. Is anybody else thinking it? Lesbians!
I fucking love that movie. That movie is so good.
Bridesmaids is great. But I mean, like, that film was marketed very clearly as the lesbian Dracula, and like,
you
when
want to see this dyke by the chick on the neck? Dracula's better.
I mean, like, this was all around the time, of course, of the Hays Code, which was very heavily influenced by the Catholic Church. Again, i.e. heteronormativity. And this was, it was advertised as the lesbian Dracula, but like, when it actually came to the film, there was barely anything that would even suggest that, apart from one scene that I always thought was absolutely hilarious. Was the daughter of Dracula offers one of her victims, like, take a glass of wine, and she drinks it, and like, she has this like white eye, like, glad stare that they used in the original Dracula, and she just like floats forward like this towards her, and the camera just pans up to like this like buck skull up on top of the fireplace, and she screams, and I'm just like, oh god, the queerness of it all, the queerness.
Now this fucking Hays Code, very much so, kind of, and like, I know we like to think of it as being like, because it I think it's literally 100 years old kind of this year.
Yes, it was the
or
preview
kind of
to how we say it, like the prelude to like the current like G rating, PG, 15s, 18s, all of that.
Yeah, exactly. It was basically like the morality policing of Hollywood, which kind of meant like the good guy always has to win. The good guy has to end up with the damsel in distress. You know, it's like she falls in love with him simply because he's the hero. And I don't know how, like, if people even realize how influential the Hays Code was in American life, like, generally, or even, like, kind of international life, because, like, we know that cinema is hugely, hugely influential, and lots of people kind of get their first experiences with things from cinema. You know, it's like a lot of time people might never have seen a trans person before sleepaway camp, and they might just kind of take away the wrong message from that, you know?
Yes.
But the Hays Code really just kind of sets up how cinema goes for the next, like, 95 years or so. I think, like, only recently have we started to actually see a switch up where women can become the hero, and they don't even have to do it in like a typically masculine way, you know? Or that like the bad guy can win sometimes because that's what happens, you know? Or that queer people are around and not, like you were saying, invisible. You know, I think you had about the Invisible Man.
Oh, yeah. So this is something that Lugoski was saying when he was talking about representation in the Depression era, around cultural politics of like the Hollywood production code and all of that kind of thing. So what he says about the Invisible Man was that, in brackets here, queer, society's invisible homosexual man, effeminate, dangerous when naked, seeking a male partner in quote-unquote crime, and only becoming visible when shot by police. So to me,
crime being my fucking asshole.
But I think like that's an excellent example of what you could see as queer coding versus also like kind of societal reality at the time, if that makes sense. Because once he becomes invisible, and then again he's literally chased across because he becomes a criminal due to his invisibleness, his outgoingness, and his otherness, and then only becomes visible again once he's, you know, destroyed by societal norms. It's absolutely crazy to me and mind-blowing. It really is mind-blowing.
It's very sad, and like we picked up on this in our symbolism and horror episode, where a huge part of horror has to do with repression and how people express that. I.e. creating fantastical creatures like vampires or werewolves. Werewolves, again, kind of have always been, to me, a male monster, or a monster about secret male feelings or things inside, because it's the idea that at night this creature, like from inside you, has to burst out, you know what I mean? And you can't kind of, when I say take accountability for it, it's like you kind of can't look at yourself introspectively. You have to kind of create an entire other persona to remove yourself from those feelings. You know? And the same kind of way, like with witches, with women, it's the idea of there being like this kind of unchained female power. It's almost like the opposite of the werewolf kind of stuff, you know?
I agree. I think with the Wolfman in particular, I mean, pertaining to queerness and things like that, I think there's a duality, especially with, you know, the actual manifestation of a werewolf changing from one to the other, where you get either, i.e. just repressed male sex drive, or just beaten down by society, or you have internalized homophobia, that when that actual this man, quote unquote, because I don't want to gentrify anything or gender anyone, but the whole point being that when gentrification the gentry,
let's get gentrified.
So like when it comes to you know, the monster or the beast being unleashed, that could be seen as either, i.e. coming out, or the internalized homophobia of not being able to come out. Does that make sense? It can be very easily seen that way, and I think at least that's how I would view it when it pertains to queer representation, especially when it comes to monsters.
Oh, you know, definitely. It's like the idea of I think, have you ever watched True Blood?
I think I watched like maybe 4 or 5 episodes of the first season, and then I was like, it's another Twilight kind of thing.
It isn't. It's actually really excellent, because there's like this whole thing where there's vampirism is kind of seen as at least in the first kind of couple of seasons, vampirism is kind of seen as like in parallel with homosexuality, because they are now, the other people kind of don't give a shit about gays anymore, like in like a bad way, but the vampires are now the new gays, and they call it coming out of the coffin. When you like
oh my god,
I love it so much. That's what yeah, that's what it's called when a vampire like reveals themselves and that universe is coming out of the coffin. I love that. But yeah, no, there's definitely always been kind of an attachment to anybody that's been on the outside. Because like if you go to a horror convention, there's every type of person there.
Yeah.
Every type of person there. And I think there's kind of like an unspoken, sorry, this is like not off topic, but we're kind of like jumping ahead 100 years. But like I think like the horror community in general is just very, very accepting of anybody.
Yes.
And that's not just queer people, that's people of color and people who look different, act different, sound different, are from different countries, or like yourself, somebody who's very, very old.
If I had hair, bitch, I would flip it, okay?
You can buy hair. I have
A
hair in my closet.
94-inch, share unit that Christopher Lee wore. Yes. And I would just...
She is 000 platinum blonde, 613 buttercup yellow. Yeah.
With a hammer and sickle, just dancing in a purple frock. Yes.
Oh, we'll get to that. We will get to that.
Oh, yeah. So,
like the duality of like male and female bodies in nature.
Oh, just
we have Baphomet.
Well, so what I want to kind of talk about next is the 40s and 50s, and this kind of era, very specifically. This one is like, I want to talk about more, but no, we're going to cut that. We're going to do this. I'm moving you along.
Okay, no,
I've got a script, bitch. Outsider looking in. Okay. Okay, so she feeling certain types of ways. Okay,
and that was Mama.
So
Mama. That's just
the kind of next era that kind of really saw the rise of quote unquote camp was the rise of science fiction horror, aliens, creature features, which really is like that kind of like, the kind of more kind of modernization of what really was. It shifted away from gothic horror and focused on the modern world because, there were obviously the anxieties based around like communism, government surveillance, nuclear annihilation, all of that kind of thing. But the 50s, specifically pertaining to the queer community and queer culture, was very emblematic of this time with the long-running involvement with the word camp. And this is where I really start to kind of really kind of identify with it, because it denotes a certain amount of acceptance, but it also pertains to I say pertains a lot. It also has that kind of you're a little bit closer to quote unquote acceptance, but it's still seen as we're not gonna kind of
we're getting there.
Yeah.
And realistically, like the next era that we're going to talk about, like we'll get there, but the next era is where everything really just explodes onto the scene. But with the 50s, it gives rise, and I think we also kind of like touched on this lightly in our symbolism in horror. It's all cyclical; it all ties in. We start to move away from kind of classic Gothic literature or literary influences and kind of classic mythology, and start to move into the rise of science and science fiction. We get that in the famous non-binary gigantic ant movie They Them.
I love that. Yes. Oh my god.
I was sitting on that one for like 2 minutes. I was like, I'm gonna bring this up when we get
But
to
also, you have The Blob, you've Body Snatchers, you have The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which was very queer coding. You have The Fly, you have The Mummy, you have all of these things that really kind of like, they really kind of push forward more of a new age way of thinking. And I think specifically because this is where the normal like separation of church and state, so therefore Hollywood became more of sort of, it was accepting to a certain point, And
This is where we get Hollywood starting to be kind of become more liberal and kind of be run by like the people. This is where we kind of start getting people making snuff films, like the wrong word, like independent movies. This is where we kind of start getting people starting to rebel and kind of treat the Hays Code as if it just doesn't exist, which is great.
You have the famous Ed Wood as well, of course.
Oh God, what is it? Planet Nine.
Yeah, like those hugely camp B movies, like Susan Sontag. Vampira. Yeah. I mean, Susan Sontag does specifically state that the 40s and 50s were a style and sensibility that regards something as appealing because of its bad taste and ironic value. So when it comes specifically to like people like Ed Wood, and then later on you have people like John Waters, of course, that like you just you really start to see the kind of it's no longer in a sense queer coding. It's sort of very slowly introducing new age ideas that
by eating dog shit off the ground.
Eating dog shit off the ground, exactly.
I actually had a whole kind of big like Facebook thing with some lady, straight obviously, about like she doesn't, no offense,
none taken,
I have a straight mom.
We deserve a bit of straight bashing, in fairness.
No, don't get me wrong, like my grandparents and my mom are straight, like it's fine. I just don't want to see it on television. No, for real. What the fuck? Oh, Facebook, yeah. Where she was kind of having this whole big kind of discourse about like she does not see the appeal and she doesn't understand why pink flamingos in movies such like that are important, and she thinks that they're basically just kind of like, when I say trash, like she didn't mean it in a good way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, I posted up this picture. It's a picture I use all the time, which always gets the heteros bothered. It's a picture of Bjork being like this, with like, go back to the heterosexual world where you belong. And this lady really couldn't take it. And she was like, oh, what? It's a straight thing and a gay thing. And I was like,
yeah,
it's a drag queen directed by a gay man. And like, you know what I mean? It's the idea of... It's the idea of ridiculousness and the idea of wanting to be like, the whole entire point of that movie is that Divine wants to be the filthiest person alive.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like the idea of kind of breaking that glass ceiling and showing that like it's the dropping of the disguise of the I'm not going to pretend I'm normal anymore. It's like, you know what? No, I am a fucking freak.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's why so many people latch on to things like Ed Wood, or like John Waters, is the fact that it's like, wait, I am fucking weird. I'm kind of like sick of pretending that I'm not weird. I should just be able to be weird.
Yeah.
And be a freak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether that's a gay freak or a non-gay freak, you can just be a freak.
Yeah. I mean, it does say, like, it's playful anti-seriousness. It's, like, the queer community have a long-standing relationship with camp and the camp aesthetics. Ergo, associating these films as camp associates them with the community. So, like, you kind of can't have one without the other, you know? And
we take being not serious very seriously.
Exactly. And that's exactly why, we do want to talk about it via this kind of lens, is because it allows us to understand it more, it allows us to explore it more, it allows us to really kind of get into the meat of it and like have a good fucking time with it. Because if you're being too serious about it, and like Sontag said, playful anti-serious, if you're being too serious about it, you've lost the point, and then there's no point.
Yeah, I think she says something, it's like the point is to be extravagant, or you gotta strive for extravagance and ridiculousness, but that is not the point.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That is all kind of a kind of beautiful side effect of campiness. God damn it, I have the hiccups.
Well, you know, when it comes to like the 60s and 70s, and this is where I know you were trying to allude more to what does kind of really kind of pushes forward was that, I mean, like with Divine, with Divine, I mean, you do get pink flamingos, you know, female trouble, multiple maniacs, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, you gotta look at it, you gotta behold it, and you gotta allow it to lift you up, because when I first watched Pink Flamingos, I looked at that and I was like, I don't even know what I'm fucking looking at. I don't understand most of what's going on. Now, I was very young when I actually watched that, and it was on TV. And I seen it and I was like, what am I even looking at? And I think that was actually my first
weirdo. I love that.
I think besides when RuPaul was on Sabrina the Teenage Witch, I think Divine and Pink Flamingos was possibly the first time I ever encountered drag on that scale, you know, I think.
Divine, I'm kind of the same. Divine was mine, but Pink Flamingos was not my introduction to Divine. My introduction to Divine was the original Hairspray.
Oh, Hairspray, of course. Yeah.
That was like one of my mom's like kind of favorite movies back in the day. And again, it was just kind of like, why does that lady sound like that? You know, just like not understanding, but being so intrigued. Seeing Pink Flamingos for the first time really, really, like, I took that shit personally. Yeah. It really kind of informed my want to, like, again, like, just be a freak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm like sick and tired of like hiding how fucking weird I am. I'm a fucking weirdo.
Yeah.
Let me just wear it on the outside.
Yes.
You know, and
yes.
it's the one scene that makes me feel so like, ugh, and it's always like running through my head when I'm wearing a certain look or wearing something that I know people will stare at or whatever. It's the scene in Pink Flamingos where Divine is just like strutting down the street.
Yeah.
Like in the middle of Baltimore, and everybody's just like, but it's real. It's like the idea that like all these people are just like, what the fuck is going on? And it's like, if that's not the kind of attention that I'm getting, I don't want to go outside.
Yeah. I gotta
when I walk outside, I think, what would Divine do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, the point of it all is be you, and it sounds prosaic, but express yourself in the most authentic manner, because if...
Hey, word count, we're playing Scrabble over here.
Because... like, if you're not going to then what's the point? I'd rather
exactly.
Like, fucking Sharon Needles said it the best. Like, nobody remembers the girl in the white flashy ball gown. Everyone remembers the girl wearing leather and puking up blood with wide eyes. That's what I.
When in doubt, freak them out.
Yeah, and if you're getting booed off stage, that is simply applause from ghosts. I love it.
I love it so much. That's actually another thing that we'll get to when we get to kind of more modern times. Because like, I don't care what people say about Sharon Needles. Like she like, she'll be another one that's remembered.
Yeah, you're not going to forget about her anytime soon. Put it that way.
But like, Nathan, like you do exactly the same thing like as I do. It's just spelt differently. Yes. You know what I mean? Like I get the same amount of looks as you do, but like, it's like you get the looks because you're wearing a t-shirt of a skeleton like eating a girl out or something, you know what I mean? Like it's like, I think we've already said it again. It's like, even if I wasn't gay, I'd still be a freak.
Yeah.
Like we'd still get stared at.
Yeah.
You know?
It's so true, and I think that's why you and me, like you just said there, like we just spell it in different ways, and I think that's such an excellent way to like paraphrase the similarities between you and me. It's like we may be total freaks, and that's what brings us together, is the fact that we found each other, and like we'll talk about this in an episode where you like
our origin story.
Yeah, our origin story. Yeah, we'll talk about this. Sorry, but like the way we found each other, and because we've stuck together for so long, like fucking glue to each other. Like that's why, and it's how amazing we are. It's horror. Horror really does. You know, we're a family. We get to choose our family. You know.
I'm so proud to speak. Yeah, I speak to get to. Yeah. I'm so proud to see.
You're my child now. You are my child now.
I am your mom. Give me a hug. That was such a weird moment in that episode.
I'm your mommy now. I'm your mom.
I'm your mommy now. Yeah, that was so creepy. Like she said it, and like she said it as she was like gliding forward, and like it was kind of threatening in a way. Yeah, exactly. Very Nosferatu. Nosferatu too.
Oh my god. Nosferatu. Nah, that didn't
That's
work.
the name of one of my characters on GTA. Is my Nosferatu with the white lingerie on his Nosferatu.
Oh. Fish. Are we having fish tonight? Not on tonight.
What were we fucking talking about?
Queer representation in horror, honey.
Shit, yeah.
In horror.
No, but for real, like we've said it before, that it's like the least weird thing about me is that I suck dicks. You know what I mean? It's like we would still be just as freakish. You know what I mean? I would just have a tighter butthole. That's the only difference. But oh my god, I'm like trying to get my mom to listen to this. Hi, mom.
Hi, mom. No, but seriously, let's get back on track with this for sure, because the next kind of this next era, 70s and all of that kind of thing, like brought on sort of in horror, it began to develop into a more kind of serious and kind of, how do I say it, like quote unquote highbrow art, like from like a high art form, i.e. Hitchcock displaying interests in horror of psychological nuances and and prestige in that area. So like you got the proto slasher films, Psycho, Peeping Tom, all of that kind of era.
Hugely queer. He dresses up in dress in that movie.
Almost explicitly. It was like, without even saying it, you knew. You knew,
Well, you kind of, like with Norman Bates, can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, with Norman Bates, you kind of get into this, like, again, it's the stereotype of, like, the mama's boy, which is, like, kind of a stereotype of, like, gay man, living in a home, kind of, quote, by himself. He's got lots of taxidermy around. He's got lots of birds around.
He's got lots of birds on his walls, but none around his arms.
But, like, but he's a fan of a cockatoo. Oh my god, are flamingos called a flamboyance of flamingos because they stand on one arm like this? Oh my god, I'm putting all the queer pieces together. Of this
you're getting there for sure.
But no, we have like I don't even know, like, obviously I'm not going to sit here and try and, like, diagnose fucking Norman Bates or anything, but it's like Norman Bates is also dressing up in his mother's clothes and killing women, specifically women, in this kind of, like, weird, like, and, like, Norman Bates is, like, a huge kind of amalgamation of, like, stereotypes, It's the idea of, like, killing women, because people have that kind of idea that, like, gay men hate women, which, like, some do.
Real, yeah.
It's, like, yeah, which is, like, disgusting, because, like, what the fuck? Like, women are lit, bro. Like, I fucking love women. Shout out to ladies! Am I right, ladies?
You get a Norman Bates, and you get a Norman Bates!
Hey, ladies night! No, but, those are the kind of things that we were talking about earlier, where it's, like, people might see that and kind of take away the wrong thing, And then we get, like, later in Gus Van Sant's Psycho, I think Norman Bates is like straight up gay. Like Vince Vaughn kind of plays Norman Bates kind of faggy. Which I think kind of adds to it, you know what I mean? I do think it kind of adds. But again, that's kind of based on Ed Gein, which is this like I don't want to say Ed Gein is like a queer icon, but lived by himself, wore mother's clothing, furniture maker. I'm just saying.
Wow. Oh my god.
Hey, look, we only have like 3 gay serial killers, you know, and he wasn't even a serial killer. He just liked to play with dead people.
I know you know you like your
Let your freak flag fly. Go ahead, keep. Yeah.
Oh my god. I don't even know if I'm gonna cut that.
No, don't. Remember, in true crime, like, representation matters even in true crime, okay?
Well, again, just gonna flip that 90-inch unit, yeah.
Y'all can't even spell Prague, okay?
So we're sort of in that era where we are talking roughly around the era of the Stonewall riots. We want to
Gay liberation!
Yeah, we want to let's just take a moment to like really get into that, because essentially we are publishing this episode on the date of the Stonewall riots, the anniversary of it. So Lee, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about that?
We spoke about this very, very, very briefly 2 weeks ago. Freddy Krueger threw the first brick at Stonewall. Queer icon. No. Okay, so legend has it that all of this kind of... Okay, let's just start from the start. All these queers, New York, 1968, like everything is kind of going down. Things don't really happen until the year afterwards. But basically in New York and kind of generally everywhere, you were kind of required to wear at least one or two pieces of clothing that was assigned to your gender, you know what I mean? So you kind of couldn't cross-dress in public at all. There was no anything like this. So these kind of bars, such as the Stonewall, became safe havens and became where you would go, you know, where you could be as queer as you want to. And obviously we're using kind of like newer language, you know what I mean? It's like people didn't really have the words for transgender people or bisexuality, all that kind of stuff, because everything was so new. And legend has it that everything kind of went down because queers were just fucking sick of being arrested and thrown in Rikers and
they were getting all kinds of hell from the police force at the time.
Exactly, and just like huge amounts of segregation, and everything had to be done in secrecy. And after basically being fucked with for years, kind of legend has it that everybody kicked off, because this also happened like the week Judy Garland died.
Yes.
And true. Her wake or funeral, I think, was actually that night. And some people had come from her thing, because it was an open kind of thing, like people could go and pay respect. And the police just chose this night to raid one of their many, many raids on the Stonewall bar, or the Stonewall Inn in New York. And all these queers said, no, not on tonight. Like, we're not fucking having it. And they tore it to pieces. They tore it down. And like, to me, this is why I think, like, sometimes when people are rioting, sometimes they're fucking right. You know, just recently in the last couple of years, we've seen riots kind of be huge in America. And I don't want to speak for you or anything, but at least for me, I think, like, well, look, if my people didn't do that, we wouldn't be where we are today. Because the Stonewall riot, which lasted for a couple of days, directly gave birth to the gay liberation movement, which then would go on to become the gay pride movement, which now is known as just Pride. You know, I think these people, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Stormy, these people really truly are, I consider them my ancestors. These people were really willing, and everybody there, all these people were willing to risk their lives, their health, to get me where I am today. You know, I'm able to walk around in my skin and not feel like somebody's going to kill me or hurt me because of these people. These people really quite literally put their necks on the chopping block for everybody to come after them, you know, and we have what we have today from queer people of color, you know. Thank you.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't find a way to like make that like fun or anything.
No, it's 100% serious because like you said there, I don't necessarily agree with riots. I think Gandhi got it right, you know, Mohandas K. Gandhi, you know, famous liberator of India and things like that got the British out of there. He did it entirely through peaceful protesting. He laid down his life and starved himself for weeks to you know, blame the British essentially. And I think peaceful protesting, even though there were riots and things like that, it was Gandhi's influence that did, you know, change for the better things that were over there. And I wholeheartedly agree that non-violence is the best direction, but that's just my opinion, I think. But I do agree with you. I do think that specifically, like you said, at that point in time, it was the right moment. It was something it's incredibly historical, and it can no longer be denied that is the impetus of as you said, like the gay liberation movement. You know, Sylvia Rivera was a huge advocate for trans people. Marsha P was a huge advocate for consistently being arrested the whole way through the rest of her life until unfortunately she was murdered. And like God rest their souls, really, seriously. And it can't be denied. Like the props are due where the props are due, and we should never ever forget these people. And it really is.
And I'm sorry if we're kind of like skipping out some names and stuff like that, because a lot of this kind of comes from second, third, fourth hand accounts. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, obviously people didn't have a fucking phone then, but it's like, to all those people that were there. And like, I know we're not going to get into a whole debate on whether rioting is like right or not, but like I think like people had enough, and like you said before, it's like violence begets violence. And I think people were just sick of getting fucked with, and really just said, you want to put your hands on us, you want to try and ruin our fucking time, well,
we're going to do the
you.
exact same. Exactly.
Yeah. And like, I also am not a huge advocate for like violence. Like, for starting, I don't think you should ever put your hands on anybody, unless they want you to. But
there's nothing hotter than consent.
And I know this kind of like isn't like super related to horror or anything like that, but like we would be remiss if we went all of Pride Month without
mentioning
about Stonewall,
of course.
Which, like you said, it really is the impetus. It's kind of, I think we're like lucky enough that we have an event like that we can really pinpoint and say like, look, this is where, it's not where it started, but this is where it broke out.
Yes.
This is where this is when really people started to listen and started to take things seriously. And I bow my head.
I doth my cap.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Like when we say, we, you know, sometimes we say it on the pod as we worship at the altar of these people that like decided to turn around and literally put their foot down and fucking say no, fuck off, get out of our space. There's no words that can describe the bravery that took to do that, and the pain and the trauma and the respect that goes along with that, and changing it became a cultural zeitgeist that changed a whole way of thinking. And I know it hasn't completely gone away. I know there is still stigmatisms out there. I know there are some people.
I was born within a stigmatism. Sorry.
I do agree. I think there are still people out there that don't view not just homosexuality, but any other type of person that goes out of the outside normality, the heteronormativity, as I mentioned before, they are still out there, and it's not completely gone away. But as time goes by, and the younger generation become older and more accepting, the less sort of pushback you're going to get for the freedom of the younger generation to express themselves. And I feel, especially with me being a million years old, it's now becoming my responsibility for generations underneath me, even though, again, as I said, like, I'm not part of the gay community, and it doesn't even have to be the gay community.
Well, you
it can
are,
be,
though. I think, like you are, like, you've been to marches with us.
Yeah. I put in my pride time.
Exactly, like, you've pumped out just as much sweat as us for the cause, you know?
I think it's time that
and I think, again, it's like, it's the principle of it. It's not necessarily just, this is only for queer people. It's like, no, this is for everybody.
Yeah.
We just, you know, it's like you cannot fight for your rights and then also exclude other people. You know what I mean? It's like, it has to all be okay, or none of it is okay.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And
I love you, man.
So what's this?
I love you.
I love you too, Mrs.
Peace the fuck out.
No, but seriously, like, okay, that was kind of not long-winded, but I think, like, we would be remiss if we talked about the 60s and didn't get to talk about Stonewall. So do we want to move on to the 70s, kind of where we get the idea of queer joy, queer things starting to happen, where we're not so much the monster in the closet, you know?
Yeah. Well, for sure, with the 70s, absolutely. I mean, like, the 70s were the really mid-era of, like, obviously John Waters was a huge thing in the 70s. The exploitation films were also subverting horror from the previous decade, using current trends like and niches and, you know, lurid content, i.e. divine. Like, you had all of that there, but you also, of course, you have, you know, the gay Freddy movie and all of these types of things. So what you got for me? What are your thoughts on that era?
Well, with the 70s, again, like, we, like, kind of mentioned this, like, earlier, like, very, very briefly. The 70s become, it's like another evolution upon kind of what cinema is and what representation is, because we get, we start moving away from the fantastical and start moving into what is actually scary about the world, i.e. murder, rape, cannibalism, all that kind of stuff. It's where we start to get things like Last House on the Left, The Hills of Eyes, shout out to Wes Craven.
Love you.
Things like Halloween even, you know, we start to get real world horrors, you know, we start to move away from the fantastical and even away from the science fiction, you know?
Yeah.
Into, like, terrifying things. And, like, I think this is also where, influences start to change and other influences start to, like, come from the outside. We get very much so, it's not man saving woman, it's man devouring woman, you know, in cinema. And then I suppose, like, we do have things like Jaws, you know, coming out in the 70s. And we'll get there. We'll get there.
Double jaw jowl movements.
There's actually something in one of the Jaws books, in the Jaws book. I only just read it a couple of weeks ago. There's, like, a queer bar in Amity, which I'm like, what the fuck? There's fully a queer bar where they say, what is it? The gays get loose and dance naked outside of it and stuff like that. The idea of all these horror movies having like the towns having, like, very specific things. Like, what is it? Nightmare or Springwood, Elm Street has a dream clinic and an S&M joint. Even though it's supposed to be, like, small town, it's not even supposed to be California. Where the fuck is it supposed to be set again?
San Francisco? No,
it's not in California. It's
well, it's somewhere near
Ohio,
desert.
Springwood, Ohio.
Ohio, there you go. That's it. Yeah.
Sorry. I had queer joints on the brain.
It's not the only
Which
joint
are the
on
only
the
types of
brain.
joints I smoke.
Oh my god. Okay, I mean, like, well, speaking of joints, I know you want to talk about the hippie movement. Oh, as she's fucking yawning.
Sorry, yeah. With good reason. So yeah, no, the hippie movement, kind of at this time, kind of towards the late 60s, mid to late 60s, early 70s, starts to introduce the world to the idea of chosen family, kind of outside of queer life. So I think more people are like starting to understand the idea of, yeah, like chosen family, the idea of like kind of sticking with friends, and not necessarily feeling like you have to be stuck to, quote, the way society is. Like, I feel like in the 60s and 70s, there was huge cultural breakdown of things that had been around for, like, a long time, you know? And we get this, like even just as recently as the 50s to then, the idea of the nuclear family, the, like, mother, 2.5 kids. Wait, I never even understood what that meant, though. Like, how do you have half a kid? But he got like a kid from the waist down or something.
I think just probably means a baby.
You're only half a child. You don't even count. But no, for real, I think like these huge cultural breakdowns are, again, right place, right time. We're being allowed the freedom to quite literally change the world. Like, literally, you know?
For sure, with like things like you had 1969, you had Woodstock. So just at the beginning of the 70s, you had literally one of the biggest, if not the most historically huge hippie congregation of free-thinking people that had no concept of judgment toward anyone. And I think that's like, you know, it only prophesized what the 70s and later on the 80s, of course, would mean to queer culture, because with Woodstock's influence over the people, like, leaving it, like, fucking weeks later, that were literally traumatized from what happened, you know, I think it's, it's definitely, the hippie movement has been a huge game changer. I mean, like, my mom is definitely a hippie. You only need to look at your bedroom to think you're a hippie. And like, when it comes to things like, I was heavily influenced, like, my favorite genre of music is 70s, 60s, 70s, you know, and the 90s. Those are my favorite things. And, you know, definitely, like, it's a game changer. Being of the gay hippie movement, rock on.
Well, for real, I think, like, when it came to hippies, it's like, that was the kind of... No, do you know what it is? People started doing drugs, and people started loving each other.
Yes!
I know, but I'm like, I'm not even joking. Like, when you're on acid, or, like, whatever else you got in your back pocket, it's hard to be prejudiced, because those things are decided on by you, and your brain just naturally wants to get on with people and naturally wants to hug people, you know? And, like, again, it's the idea of free love, that was, like, for everybody.
Yeah.
You know? Everybody could get in on that. Everybody was allowed to have a piece of that, you know? And, although I suppose, like, the Manson murders happened the same year as Woodstock.
Yeah.
They were also hippies. But go off, though. Yeah. Happy Christmas, Charlie Manson.
Oh, my God.
Who has really good music, by the way. Like, I can promo him because he's dead. Charles Manson. Dude. The first album, Charles Manson and the Love Cult, is so good. There's a time for living. I'll send you the link on Spotify. Charles Manson has good music.
Oh my God. Okay.
There, I said it. What are you gonna do? Nail me to a cross on Pride Month? I think the fuck not. That's how I'm going out, though. For my funeral, I want my taxidermied body crucified.
Like,
if you don't try and make
wax.
that happen, you're never my friend. Yeah. Yeah, House of Wax style, not taxidermy, just covered in wax.
Yeah. Well, like speaking of like how the hippie movement kind of did the whole kind of influence things, like you actually just mentioned about like the breaking down of like the normativities of the era, and that was very much like it bled into the 80s for sure, because the 80s were a complete breakdown of like you know, it was balls to the walls in the 80s, but the 70s were the ones that really kind of pushed it to grounds that allowed everything to move forward afterwards. And that was like disrupting, like you just said, the nuclear family, straight couples, sex in suburbia. You know, that would be like what you look at, like what we just had. You had the Lost Boys, you had the breakup of the nuclear family, which was Rocky Horror Picture Show, and you know, you had Nightmare 2, of course. So like, you know, sex and suburbia, like these were the things that like you really
Even
saw
Lost Boys,
change.
she just got divorced.
Yes,
You
exactly.
know, that's the breakup.
And yet you still saw that she cared.
I was close to being Moonchild or Moonbeam or something like that. His parents being ex-hippies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like the idea that like the thought process of people was different. People started viewing the world differently, and people started kind of allowing themselves to have different freedoms because of like the hippie movement. Because that's all it is. It's like there is no real restraints from besides what people decide.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I gotta
you're
agree
free
with you.
Bring yourself from here. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. It's so true.
Yeah.
It's genuinely so true.
It is very true. You have that. What's that quote where if the majority are insane, insanity becomes the norm. And if you swap it around, the norm becomes the insanity, and then they're the minority. So you have to constantly rethink all thought processes as time goes through. And especially with the 70s moving into the 80s, that was the thought process. That was the change that happened in that time. And you have things like, you have Carrie, as you said, like the Lost Boys, all of that kind of thing was consistently getting broken down and changed. Your thought process was allowed to evolve because there was less influence from the previous generations, and there was a more of a freedom allowed, and that really helped.
And like the idea that in Carrie that it's like she's a freak because she's religious is such a turnover from even the 60s, where again, like religion was just so part of everybody's everyday life. And then even 10 years later to get to the 70s, where everybody thinks Margaret White is a freak because she's religious. And I guess she's like kind of a zealot, like she's overly religious, but it's like that's what others carry from people, is the fact that she's religious. And in that movie, her mother puts her in a literal closet.
Yeah, love that.
And like there is huge parallels. Again, like I said, it's like queer things do not have to necessarily be about queer people or even starring queer people. It's the idea that like Carrie is the other. She's treated with an otherness and is suspicious when people try and be nice to her, and was right to be suspicious because they fucked her over.
Yeah.
You know? But it's the idea of like, oh wait, I could be desirable. You know, and there's the irony in that book is actually fabulous, because like, and it hurts all the more. It's the what is it, to the devil with modesty, you know what I think they say in that movie. And Carrie wins by one vote in that movie, right? And in the book, and she voted for herself. So if she hadn't have voted for herself, Carrie would have never got on stage and never would have got covered in pig's blood.
Well, there you go. Stephen King fucking up good people.
Oh, it's so good. Pig's blood for a pig. Honestly, if you haven't read Carrie before, anybody, find yourself a copy of it online. It's like very, very small. Very, very small for a Stephen King book. You can read it in a day.
Well,
you really can, though. It's very small.
Well, speaking of, like, you know, the, like, kind of, like, how do I say this without sounding like I'm moving on? But like the 80s were sort of a real kind of game changer when it came to like not just gay representation, but more to the kinky side of gay representation.
Yeah.
So I mean, like,
and this is where we also start getting like kind of, although mostly awful, we start getting kind of trans representation in horror. You know, pretty much kind of all we had up until then was Psycho or Dressed to Kill, and even there, those people are not transgender. It's just kind of the closest that people had. But with the 80s, we get Sleepaway Camp, and like to an extent Silence of the Lambs, even though that's 1990, but it's technically an 80s movie, like made in 89.
Yeah,
the book is 80s, even though Buffalo Bill is not transgender, he just thinks he is.
Yeah, I mean, you also have Hellraiser as well, and famously only done up because Clive Barker was, I don't think it was closeted at the time of the book's release, but it did reveal, I mean, obviously part of his sexuality and his kinks and what turns him on. I mean, like, it's literally like chains, whips, and leather. Like, let's be
Sheriff of the Week, Clive Barker, that man is so beautiful.
Yeah, it really does kind of like reveal possibly a different side of not just the queer community but also the straight community, because like, you do have
showing a different side of sex.
Yeah, a different side of sex, and it reveals a lot about people that were at the time you know, questioning sexuality or looking at sexuality in a different way as to the traditional sense of sex and how it can be interpreted and misinterpreted and changed around, and dominance and submissiveness, all of that kind of thing as well, for sure.
Sadism, masochism, nipples cut off, hooks in faces.
Yeah.
And Hellraiser again, it's like it's such a hugely sexual film.
Yeah.
And I'm actually very, very excited to see how they're going to explore Hellraiser in the new upcoming show with the lead Cenobite being female. I wonder how the kind of dynamic will change. And a lot of people are pissed off, but it's like, yeah, but you can tell those people have never read the book. It's like fucking Pinhead, who's not even called Pinhead in the book, is not even the lead Cenobite and is described to have the voice of an excited little girl. You know what I mean? Like, Pinhead is like very, very, very androgynous. The quote-unquote Hell Priest, which is Pinhead's character, is supposed to be very, very androgynous. Like, these people like have only seen the first movie. Like, you can tell.
I also love the fact that there's also that comic book series and the and like I know I think it's the lead, the female lead. Yeah, she becomes.
She's the current Pinhead.
Yeah, she becomes it. So she like. Yeah, and I think that's crazy, but I also think that's really, really cool, and I love that idea of like the huge dichotomy between like what she was as we actually seen her. So with the 80s, I mean, the argument can be made that with the easing of like the Catholic Church influence, you know, on the film industry by the late like 60s, early 70s, you know, after like public exposure to Vietnam, Nixon, you know, the Manson family, like you just said, and the rise of the slasher genre, like new ratings were allowed, and they helped give like the stronger like themes that we see as it progresses through the 80s, and like how far as far as like queer coding and gay actors and all of that kind of thing can become more visible. And I think like
that starts to really worry people though.
Yeah, it did.
Like, we start to get like lots of like picketing around movies and stuff like that, because it's like no offense, but it's like a lot of coding and like subtext and stuff like that really does fly under people's radar, and they didn't know it was happening, you know. But now with the rise of things like Hellraiser or like kind of things of that nature, people are it's starting to get spelled out explicitly for people, and people are starting to worry.
Yeah.
And then we also get in the 80s, we got the AIDS crisis.
Yeah. I was just about to say that. Yeah.
It's huge for, again, like not only queer people, obviously, like anybody can fucking get AIDS, but it's like, I think that people really thought that this was like end times for queer people, where it was like, well, it's God's wrath and here you go. Because again, like, it was largely affecting the gay community. And I think, again, this is another big shift as to how people kind of looked at gay people. It really, like, kind of put the stigma again, not only that gay people were disgusting, but also dangerous, you know? Which, like, fucking sucks, you know? Because it's like, we already, like, kind of got over that with the... I think I said this to you earlier when I was on the phone to you, like, before we recorded, that, like, there was kind of a period in time where people kind of felt like, will homosexuality, like, end the, like, human population if women start coupling up with women and men start coupling up with men, and will people stop reproducing, you know? But then that kind of faded out. But then again, when somebody fucked a monkey and then somebody fucked Freddie Mercury and then the world ended. Yeah, but like, again, like, it set people back, which was like very, very unfortunate, you know, after kind of all the hard work that had come along. For something like the AIDS crisis to really set people back. And even now, there's still huge stigma around HIV and AIDS. Yeah. You know, just out of this era, you know, just people were terrified.
Yeah. I do think that with the rise of the AIDS crisis, the changing of the politics and like sort of the rise of a higher educated liberal side to people, there was a gradual upshift and change. Like you said, like the idea was that if homosexuality was on the rise at the time, then the human population would start to disappear and all of that kind of thing. But I do think that as I said, like with the rise of more highly intelligent liberals and the democratic left per se, that there was a change toward the better. There was an upturn in education around these things, around AIDS.
Definitely. We had already come too far to go back.
Yeah.
And I think, like you were saying there, it's like there was a rise in education, and there was a kind of a shift in power where it's like, well, look, the presidents of your company are queer, and like, even if they're not out, it's like they're still holding that position of power, you know what I mean? And power dynamics, as we kind of well know, are very, very hard to change once they're established. So I think, like, even though we had a huge drawback, I think, like, again, yeah, we had come too far to ever regress.
Yeah.
No, so it was just a pebble in the road. That sounds like I'm really like shrinking like AIDS, but I'm saying, like, no, but it's like, but it didn't stop us. It was a huge thing, but like, we persevere.
Yes.
Till I rise. You
know. you are the next Supreme. It's your time to rise. Yeah, for sure. And you definitely see that reflective, like moving into like the 90s and things like that, where with the sense of higher education, like as the AIDS crisis, the early to mid huge rise in the AIDS crisis, as it began to take that downturn as people became more educated, the gay community slowly becoming more accepted with education as it was. You definitely see that reflective in the horror films of that time, because with things like when we got into like the horror of the 90s, it became almost non-supernatural for the most part. It became like it was mainly slasher films. You had Scream, you had The Silence of the Lambs,
like people like you, which is kind of weird. Okay, with Silence of the Lambs was going to be one of the options for this month.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because like, even though it is had kind of bad representation, I guess. We also get some like gay shit in Hannibal where
Love that movie.
you want to try some poppers, and he like gives Gary Oldman poppers and makes Gary Oldman cut his face off. I think like we were still kind of, like, we were still kind of like limited like for options and stuff like that. But what the fuck was I going to say? Oh, we start to get the idea of the other being celebrated, or even like the quote unquote villain being celebrated. Like yeah, we still have Scream and stuff like that where like the villains are the villains, but then we have like The Craft, things like that where it's like it was like fucking cool to be a freak and be like the other.
Yeah.
And like I even said this to you before we started the call, the reason why I think gays kind of, well, not even gays in general, just kind of queer people and others latch onto Nancy is because at the end of that movie, Nancy's the only one that didn't go back into the theoretical closet. She never stops using magic and never tries to stop using magic. And like, even though she's the villain, I'm like, fuck yeah, like she never put it away and she never hid herself.
Yeah.
And I think for that movie, all those other girls were ashamed and Nancy was never. So I feel like that's why people kind of grasp onto people like that. And people like Ursula as well. We get Ursula in 1989, Disney's The Little Mermaid, which is famously based on Divine, which I think is a huge step. The idea that like Divine, the shit-eating goddess, could be represented in like one of the biggest Disney movies, like one of the biggest children's movies of all time. Yeah. And people identify with her. Yeah. You know, she again is a woman living by herself. Hello?
Keep going.
A woman living by herself, after having been cast out. You know, she helps people, but it's like she's got a huge sense of like theatricality, but she's also scary, but she's also kind of tempting in a way, you know. I think like we start to identify with the villains, which is fucked up, but it's like the villains are always more interesting.
They're creative, they're deliciously evil at times. I love that. However, I will say Nancy
said that when you have Scar, come on,
that was actually my biggest fucking gripe with the quote unquote live action Lion King. I was like, if you're going to bring back the guy who voiced Mufasa, bring fucking Jeremy Irons. I'm sorry, he was iconic in that role. You can't. And I'm sorry, whoever the actor was who played Scar, he just didn't do it to. He didn't do it for me.
Yeah, it's like you really could have changed, but it's like you needed to have James Earl Jones as Mufasa, and you needed to have Jeremy Irons as Scar. And there's always one moment that I always really enjoyed, even as a kid, with Scar, where like, he exits stage right, but where he kind of like, throws his hair back and like jumps into the next scene. I always like loved that, and like looking back on it, I'm like, Scar again never procreated with the rest, you know, like even Kovu in the next movie is not Scar's child. You know what I mean? Scar never procreated with any of the other females. He just wanted to be king, or queen.
Well, just quickly touching back on Nancy there for a second, specifically talking about the sequel. I think, now I did not watch the sequel not because like it was anything to do with like different types of queer representation or anything like that. It was mainly just due to the fact that they did a huge disservice to Nancy and they threw her in a fucking mental hospital. It just, when I'd seen
she was in a mental hospital?
No. I refuse to believe that a bitch who can literally change her face and can change the weather and make people see shit and float and all of that did not get out of a mental hospital. I refuse that, especially when it turns around that main kid was her kid. No, I'm not going to believe that.
But you know,
terrible writing.
She only had those powers because she had the power of the four. She had everybody, all the other corners to call with her, and the only reason she was able to cast all those glamours and shit like that is because she was able to take in the power of like Manon or whatever like that. Like at the end, she was still trying to use magic, but like she was alone in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The only reason any of that shit happens in the first movie is because Sarah shows up and they have their fourth. But yeah, no, it did do a huge disservice. But also in The Craft, the sequel, we have one of the girls in the circle, I guess, is a trans girl.
Is trans, exactly.
Yeah, we have so we have kind of like big representation. Again, it's like, but that movie wasn't for me. Like, all the fucking cute outfits in the world were never going to sell it to me. And I think people nowadays, people maybe like 10 years younger than me will love that movie and maybe kind of get attached to it the same way I did, or like we did, because it's more relevant, I guess. Now it's like I don't identify with that, you know. It's like I saw those girls in the original movie as like cool older teenagers who I like wanted to fucking be like, and you know. But like now, I guess I'm not like down with the kids enough to like enjoy kind of the different stuff. But I like that they focused on it being like sisterhood and it being like
it's a very much a feminist manifesto as well. It can be interpreted that way as well, for sure. Yeah.
I think the new movie very much so is The Craft in like a woke world. You know what I mean? They were really kind
you said it.
No, but I did. I think it's not that I find that irritating at all, but I think I find it irritating when it's done in like a movie or something like that, because it usually comes across as very, very try hard.
Yeah, it does come across as virtue signaling in a way, and it can come across as shallow and not well thought out in a way that builds up the characters, but it becomes in a way slightly more vindictive towards, because it does happen with, I know the villains are all men in that film, and it does come across as very much women versus men, and it can be like that, but it should have just been done in a better way, and it just wasn't. Yeah. You know, there's a way to make like a misogynistic man look evil.
Just become a podcast about The Craft. Yeah.
No, there's a way to make a misogynistic man look evil, and like I've seen like how the father figure in that film comes across, and it literally just comes across as a cut and paste 1940s, you know, patriotic male from America, suburbia, saying like, I'm the head of the house, and there's no other way.
Oh my god, I'm gonna hit it. Yeah. I know, and the movie was, it just felt
flat.
Yeah, and again, I do think a huge part of that is because I am like 10 years older than all the leads in the movie. But like,
for once, someone feels old.
Yeah, but you forget that I'm still younger than you, and that will never, ever, ever change. Nathan, even if I live to 175 years old, I will still be younger than you and all of our friends.
Well, third hair flip of the day.
What was that? It's the sound of spring chicken.
Plucked. I am plucked. So the kind of last thing that I kind of really wanted to touch on was the slasher genre of the 90s was a huge, huge big thing in horror. It kind of steered most of that decade in as the leading kind of point of horror, really. And, you know, by and large, beyond the purview of, you know, homoeroticism or this or anything like that, it was changing the traditional respectable middle age or class audience. It was changing their purview towards things that they weren't always thinking, because in the early 2000s, you just said it, that like you saw sort of the rise of the feminist manifesto, and then I don't want to say the gay agenda, but like the gay kind of, you know, underpinnings that were part of that decade.
It is true. It's like the gay agenda was just to kind of get to the point where like gays were like not like a ooh shit, you know what I mean? Just to have them be like any other character and not have it necessarily be the point. But yeah, I think that's like kind of why like we're we were saying just before hopping back on here that like the horror genre now is still kind of massively evolving, and we haven't had, I don't want to say not much progress, just because I think the 90s kind of left us off in a good spot in terms of queer representation. Like, I don't think the 90s really did anything to be harmful in terms of like characters in movies and things like that. So I think like maybe a couple of years from now we'll revisit this topic and be able to reflect on the last 10-20 years, just because like we're kind of in the middle of it. It's hard for something to feel historical while it's happening.
Yeah, it's hard to define something that talking about camp, it's hard to define it while we're living through it. But with things like, you have things like Scream, of course, and you have Stu and Billy. I mean, like, kind of that film in particular, like, it echoed the
homo repressed mama's boy.
Yeah, it sort of echoed the previous 2, even 3 decades, like the warping or almost the smashing together of otherwise believed respectable puritanical heteronormativity that oppressed and broke down, you know, everything. And it like, when you have films that do specifically have these underpinnings, the moral conditioning, it teaches us to fear it. But when you have things like, you know, Buffalo Bill that we should have mentioned, and then you have people like Billy and Stu, that sort of, it can be viewed as a negative stereotype of, you know, someone who believes they're trans, quote unquote, because that was what was said in The Silence of the Lambs. And then you have Billy and Stu who
Buffalo Bill was a transgender.
So yeah, you can very much read into these, and you can see the point, and yeah, you can concede it, you know.
Well, it's kind of touching on the points that it's like, again, kind of this stereotype, like we were saying back in the 60s, this stereotype of like gay men like hating women, and like I think like again like it kind of, I feel like that comes from plain and simple of like not wanting to have sex with women because people think that women's only value is to have sex with. I think like seeing things like Psycho or like Silence of the Lambs or even Scream, where the people to die in those movies are almost exclusively female, and being killed by almost exclusively male people, and they even call that out in Silence of the Lambs, that Clarice's transsexuals, because that's like the terminology used at the time and still used by some people now, says that transsexuals are usually very passive. You know what I mean? So like I like that I like that they differentiate there, because I think a lot of people have the idea that Buffalo Bill is a very, very harmful character, but I think like, no, if you actually pay attention, like they do differentiate and make sure to kind of say like Buffalo Bill is not a woman, and like is like Buffalo Bill is actually just kind of messed up in the head. This is not the condition that he has. It's something different, where it does feel like an attack on gender itself.
Yes.
The idea of like wanting to become.
Why'd fuck me?
Yeah.
It puts its lotion
you know what I mean?
on
It's
the
like the
skin,
idea
or
of
else
wanting
it
to, like,
gets the
physically
hose
become a
again.
Well, for real, and then like some of the
Your dog's real hurt, mister.
Don't leave me, you bitch! Yeah.
Was
she a great big queer person? Yes, sir. She was kind of kind. But no, some of the things. I think Buffalo Bill has a hatred of women in that movie.
Yes.
Because of there's a scene, I think it's kind of that first scene where we're introduced to Catherine Martin. I think like she like realizes that the nails are dug into the wall, and he kind of does this thing where he like she starts screaming, and he does this thing where he kind of, I don't want to say like mocks. He is kind of like making fun of her, but it also looks like he's trying to kind of like pay attention to the way that she behaves, where he's like cowering in the same way she is, like he's trying to like cower his shoulders in the same way. And I do believe that Buffalo Bill in that movie just kind of and in the book has a hatred for women, and I feel like that's the negative part to take away from Silence of the Lambs. And then kind of moving on to with Scream. I mean, like Billy and Stu are very, very, very close friends. Let's just say that. But also, I think that like, I think Billy in that movie has a similar rage and a hatred for women that I think people can read as kind of gay or as kind of queer in a way. Because as we know, Billy doesn't take the rage out on his father, because as we know, spoiler alert for literally a fucking 25-year-old movie, Billy is mad at Sydney's mom who slept with his father, but he's not mad at the father, he's mad at the woman in the situation.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like there can be kind of, yeah, like you can definitely read that into it. And like, again, in a horror movie, I think like you can take away from it what you will, but I think in a horror movie you should be granted, and nearly are always granted, the freedom to make like villains bad. Like, guess what? Villains are bad people, so they should do bad shit and they should be evil. Yeah. You know, I don't want my queer villain to be made a good person just because they're queer. It's like, no, it's the whole point of equality. It's like, I want to see gay pieces of shit on TV. You know, I want to see trans villains, you know, but it's like, unfortunately, we're kind of, trans people are still kind of at the point where you're really trying to get people on your side and really trying to get people to understand you.
Yes.
And in future, I guess we'll be able to have trans villains and not have it negatively impact our community and not negatively impact trans men and women.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
We'll get there one day.
We're not quite there yet, but we are getting there. We are working towards it. We're getting there. Eventually.
No, but for real, it's like I think the world and media is comfortable enough now to have a gay villain and not worry about people thinking that gay people are evil.
Yes.
You know, but unfortunately it just isn't that way for our trans brothers and sisters just yet. But again, like, we will get there, you know, as this episode shows, his progress is slow but sure.
Yeah, and it's always assured. It's always it's never a movement backwards. It is always going forwards. It may be moving forward slowly, yes, accepted, but it is moving. And we are all, we, like you and I, we're a testament to that. We have to work together in order to move forward. And it's true. Like, someone always said, it was like, you work from the back row and you start from the people at the back and we all move forward together at the same time. And that's how it should be.
Exactly. Yeah. You said that to me before. I always really like that saying, that it's like, you start with the people that most need it, and then you work your way to the front.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Exactly.
Again, like at this kind of moment that just happens to be trans people, kind of trans people of color. And once we kind of get to a place where it seems unattainable, but it is very much attainable. There was a point in time where like, it was illegal to be gay, you know, and it was illegal to be trans, and it's like that stuff is all changing, and a change is coming. But you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we can't give up. We can't give up. That's what this month is all about: is not giving up and persevering, and knowing to take help when it's needed.
Yeah. Take a helping hand.
Because again, it's like, this was not just set up all by, we need the acceptance. Like, that's the wrong way to say it. But yeah, we need everybody to be on board. And by everybody, it's humans, not just straight, gay, black, white,
Everybody.
everything. It's like we need to strive to get to a point where these things aren't important anymore and they're almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. And my kind of closing thing on this was, you know, reading into the movies, especially horror movies, with a queer subtext, overtone, anything to do with the actual type of representation. Reading into these is important for a myriad of different reasons. Number one is to obviously understand them, to reconcile with stereotyping.
I just got a notification on YouTube of like top 5 queer horror movies to watch this Pride Month. Sorry,
oh
cool.
Wow. It's to have an understanding, to build an acceptance, to understand stereotypes, to really kind of get into that. You know, only validating a long history of queer exploration in horror through the lens of film only solidifies its relationship with the horror cinematic origins, you know. And it saved, I mean, I actually failed to mention this earlier, but it saved Universal Studios' ode to the horror and the monster movies genre due to queer directors, writers, authors, and it solidified queer theory and film theory's long-standing relationship with each other. And you know, it's absolutely undeniable. And when I did find that out, I found it incredibly compelling to understand, and really it sort of just opened my eyes.
The power of queer compels you.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, that's exactly it. I mean, like you said earlier, you actually said it at the beginning of this, was that the queer forefathers of the gay community paved the way and single-handedly saved some of the biggest, film studios of the modern times. And if we didn't have those people, I mean, Dracula and who was it? The Phantom of the Opera, both headed by gay directors, with gay actors, with gay writers, with gay authors of those stories, single-handedly saved the cinema industry. Those two films,
and even
helped
Frankenstein,
save them from bankruptcy.
Gay director, female writer, Mary Shelley wrote the book.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, it really was. It is absolutely amazing, and it's undeniable. It's just undeniable.
Yeah, and I think like you said, it's like we can never progress backwards, because that's not what progress means. But
revert. I
think like now everybody is kind of about celebrating the differences rather than trying to find, like, that's the thing. I hate when people are like, we're all the same, and it's like, no, but we aren't, and that's why it's great. You know, I always hated this thing of like like, we're all the same, and it's like, no, we should be allowed to be different and be celebrated for being different. You know, if everybody was the same, like, they make horror movies about that, you know what I mean? Nobody wants to be a body snatcher. Nobody wants to be a pod person.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be Stokely from fucking from the Faculty.
Mary Louise from Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for that statement,
that movie teaches you that to be suspicious of outsiders and to pretty much burn them as soon as they come into the school.
Yeah. For that statement, I suppose, like, I would probably like to close on this. Like, Susan Sontag writes that camp is set out to make people, turn people into heroes who didn't set out to be heroes in the first place. And, you know, for that statement, I think that perfectly encapsulates everything that we've just spoken about. Is people like Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, Tom, like the director of Dracula, like all these people, they paved the way they didn't set out to be heroes. They weren't called on to be heroes, but they did end up being these people who led the way and really saved a lot of people. They really did. And, you know, for me personally, if I didn't have horror, if I didn't have the weird things that I have today, I personally don't think I would be here. I don't think I would have, you know, survived this long without, you know, having the weirdest shit on the planet to love and to identify with, you know, and to find my tribe.
And blood sacrifice of children.
Of course. So, yeah.
Why do you think my skin is so tight?
And that's all
Children's blood.
That's all she wrote on that.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that as well. Horror very definitely helped me find my tribe, my community. And yeah, it's like the love of my life.
It's true. It's true.
I'm a big gay slut for horror. This hole is always open for horror, baby. Yeah. Oh god, is your mom still in the room?
No. She left quite a while ago. Oh. So
don't even know why I'm fucking here.
Wow, way to kill an entrance there.
Did you get that up? Did you pick that up?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so that was our really, really great deep dive. I fucking love this episode. Camp notes on horror, man. That was a fucking ride and a half.
I just really yawned.
Are we done?
Oh.
Someone's
No,
really
y'all,
tired.
I got my jab today, so I'm fucking wrecked. Yeah.
So next week, we will not be having a themed month. However, seeing as it is midsummer, we are going to have my selection and also a fan request from quite a while ago, and we have never forgotten about it. So props to you who put it in there in the comments. You asked for Midsommar and you're going to get it. So 2019's Midsommar is next week. We're going to retrospect it. You're going to fucking love it. It is going to be a big deep dive, just like we did with Hereditary beforehand. We are going to jump right on into it. It's going to be a nice long one. You're going to need some fiber to push that one out, for sure. So yeah, that will be this Friday coming. So you're listening to this hopefully on a Monday, Pride Day. And then, of course, on the Friday, of course, everything returns back to normal. And yeah, it's going to be a fun time.
I love it.
So you've been listening to...
And this has been the SLAB.
An episode topic discussion where we probe and postulate a topic and get in
Are we really going to do all...
We get elbow deep up in there. Fucking lubricate. You need lube for this shit. For sure. Literally.
Nah, just nice bit of spit. I don't think I've ever actually used lube as lube. No joke. Am I oversharing? Whatever, it's Pride Month.
Don't forget
Am I oversharing? Whoa! That's oversharing.
Don't forget, of course, to like, subscribe, comment below if you have any topics or movies that you would like us to have a general shite talk about. So let us know what you think. Good, bad, indifferent. Leave it below. And don't forget to follow us on our Instagram for some daily updated content.
And please don't let us stop you sending us money.
Yes, of course. All right, guys. See you soon.
Unpleasant dreams.
Well, prideful dreams. That was corny, wasn't it?
That is a sin, Nathan.